long time to put together, and the very first county commissioner meeting that I brought this to the county commissioner, I actually asked Grant Houston from the Historical Society. I said, would you like to be a part of this? He said, well, I'd love to have the dog, but I don't want the fleas to come with it. I think that's what he said, something like that. So there's one of those things. But at any rate, so we worked along with this deal, and I mean, there's been lots of ups and downs, and emotional roller coaster of getting there, and sometimes we felt that we were in the right direction, and other times, then all of a sudden you were going backwards a different way. And Kai's been great to work with, and CDHP with Mark Rudolph, and DRMS, and Tony Weldon, and that group, and Bob Oswald, and EPA, and the BLM. You know, without all their help and input, this thing would never have gotten anywhere. And also a special thanks to DIRT and their folks, and Colorado Art Ranch who came. And you're going to see some slides in here of some pretty exotic ideas that some people had in this thing. But at any rate, it is the mine that did make Lake City. And so without further ado, we'll go along. And you guys can read along with this, and Mark and I will share some comments. And
we'll save questions for the end. We'll give plenty of time, and there'll be question and answer on this side as well.
And, you know, Kai was right. I mean, that is a true statement. If you had a nickel or a dime, you could have funded this entire project. And, you know, people stop and take pictures of that thing, and Jane Jones was nice enough to let us use this picture, and which is a very significant thing. And we kind of, you know, there's tons of people that have, you know, it's part of their deal. They stop and they look at it, and it has such a rich history, and it's an amazing piece of property, and so we're excited about moving forward. As they said yesterday, it was the first mining claim, patented mining claim, and the estimated $12 million mined at 1874 to that 1903 date. I don't know what that value would be today, but that was that dollar value then. So that is a huge amount of money. What we've taken at the county is a 12-acre site. It has a lot of history there. It demonstrates many years of technology and mining. And it was a, you know, like we said earlier, it was a privately held thing, and it was nonprofit organizations, state, federal agencies. And the Ute is being reclaimed for heritage tourism to show our unique history and of Lake City. This is just kind of a map of where it is, and some of the other mining claims that are there, and a picture of the old building you guys will see today. You know, earlier it began, you know, in 71, and Henry Hinson and those folks who had done that, and, you know, before the Bruneau Treaty was signed, there was actually a little town that was an Italian mining camp that was on the other side of the river, was known, and I've heard this, and Grant may stop me if I'm wrong, but I've always heard it was called the Hinson, the town of Hinson, which was a city, and it was an Italian miners that predominantly worked there. It predominantly was a silver base metal mine, but it had other unique characteristics in it, you know, and copper and lead was a byproduct of that, but it's really a lead silver with some gold production in it. The historical community piece of this, and in this lower picture down here is a what they call the Buckeye motor, and it was, I believe, Matt Ingram from here in Lake City was the last guy to run that thing, and it was August sometime in 95 or 97, and it broke a water jacket, and the reason, but it's a huge motor that ran a 250 kW. For as big as a motor is, you'd think the generator was bigger than that. There's some interesting historical facts of this, that Warner Delano, the grandfather of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was one of the bank owners that took over the Ute in its history, in its bankruptcies. The other thing is that some of the metals from this mine were used with Thomas Edison's in his laboratory in his experiments, which is a very unique history for us. And the mill was powered with a hydroelectric plant until 1973 when that dam, and you'll see the hole in the dam, it broke, which there was another dam below there called Hidden Treasure Dam, and it broke and created miles of contamination and stuff down the river. And the folks over here, and it flooded the road, county road, and county road and bridge guys diligently worked to build it back up, and you can still see some of that work where they pushed gravels and stuff back up. The bullet number 5, the 326 folks who were brought to settle a strike that was here of the Italian miners who were promptly fired in March of 1899. And there's lots of debates about that, but they basically shut off Hinson. Nobody went up or went down, and they forced those Italian immigrants, miners, to stay in Hinson. It was kind of like a union uprising, so to speak, and it was because they had stole some firearms and out of the armory. And so there's lots of history from that. That this is the industrial assets of the mine. We're very limited. 96.5% of our county is publicly owned, and so the county is very diligent on acquiring or BLM acquiring private property here because it's a tax-based issue, and you have to be very careful on when you do that because you don't have enough of it and it puts an onerous upon the rest of the taxpayers. We only have like 3,200 tax receipts in Hinsdale County. I mean, we're tiny. We're also one of the most, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, we're the most remote county in the United States because Alaska is borrows. And how we figured out how they did that actually is because you can go 13 miles either side of a road before you come to another road. So that's, if you think about it, but when you say that you're the most remote county in the United States, and obviously the folks who drove here, you can figure that out. So, but, we have that, and we, in our commercial redevelopment, it supports our economic goals. I mean, we have a lot of ideas, and the community has a lot of ideas on what we can do with some of these structures, whether it's we're going to make it a mining museum, in part with, Hardtack has an underground mine tour thing there. You have the old 100 you guys have there in Silverton. But the Alpine Loop is such a unique piece because people drive up and there's tons of things that people stop and they take pictures of and they look, and it's very, very, impressive. And if you really think about, I'm in the excavation business also, and I look at what these guys built. It doesn't matter where it is. It's like the photograph that Bruce showed you of the building on the side of that hill. I mean, you couldn't do that today by building standards if you tried. And just the logistics to get that stuff here, and the sweat and the tyranny that they put together to build that stuff is amazing. And you really have to honor and sit in awe and say, so it is a big deal and all this stuff. I mean, you can't imagine how many hard-working guys that probably said a lot of nice things when they were putting it together. So, but that's part of it. And, the Adams Forks is part of this, Mayflower Mill, the Underground Mining Museum, the Bachelor Loop, even in Crete. I mean, we're very blessed here in the San Juans, and so it's our diligence to take care of what we have here, and this is part of what we have. The natural assets, of our watershed, and this is, you'll see some slides coming up, is to protect that. And, the DM, Division of Minerals and Reclamation, and the watershed group here, and the watershed groups on the other side, who are cleaning up these things and protecting water sources. Our water source for our town is downstream of this mine. And one of these photographs that you're going to see, you'll see why this is a big deal. And after 1973, it was an eye-opening experience because that stuff went miles down the river. And it was insignificant to what and you'll see in one of these slides, it's very impressive here in a minute, why that was such a big deal to us, to protect our watershed in that aspect. This also, because Kai, in his donation, it has some stream frontage to it. And so we have now some public access, And the irony of it is our county is so publicly owned, but the bottom of the valleys, it's like anywhere else, was all privately held because that's where the most fertile and productive ground was. And so it does limit access to streams and things like that. Even though the rest of it's public, sometimes people can't get there. So this will enhance that. We have the ATV, four-wheel drive along the backcountry thing, and there's been attempts for ice climbing there, kind of like in Uray, we may want to steal some of your customers. But and other outdoor recreational opportunities. And I'm going to let Mark talk a little bit about this.
Okay. So the state was initially brought in under request from EPA and BLM that differences between the various federal agencies and LKA, they were kind of at a stalemate in being able to try to progress forward on getting cleanup initiated. With me being in the Brownfields program, we try to always work cooperatively on a basis where everybody was going to be in a win-win scenario. So I said, okay, attorneys, let's hold off for now. Let's see if we can try to work some negotiation through where the county takes title, and then we can pull additional resources. LKA can be contributing to a degree, where we get this cleaned up, we get it into public ownership to the point where the county can then begin to do preservation work on the buildings. So it's been, I would say, probably 4 or 5 years going since my involvement, at least, to where we are now, where the county took title to the actual mine and mill site 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago.
And I'm happy to say that as of yesterday, EPA has a signed action memorandum to complete the cleanup work this summer along the Henson Creek frontage, that you all will see where tailings and waste rock is stuck in. We have a long list of people that have been involved in here, and I would say that this list is probably, while it's lengthy, there are other unseen components. The community in itself, their involvement, their passion on the site, and getting this preserved into public ownership. Let's see. Okay, so we have here the overall plan. Okay, I'm going to back up a little bit. So the site of Ute Ulay is actually 2 sites. There's the Ute Ulay town site, or the former Henson town. Henson town site. And then there's the mine and the mill site on the other side of the road, the engineer pass road that fronts along Henson Creek. We saw the town site as, while it had some environmental issues there, as a more manageable piece to bite off in the beginning. So last year, the county took title to that, and they received a grant from CDPHE, and we completed the cleanup work on the site, and you'll get a chance to see that. And I don't think there's any snow up there right now, is there? Okay. So you'll get to see that. There was a hiking trail put in, and DRMS came in, and they stabilized the head frame, and it looks fantastic. So that site, for the most part, is all done with the exception of some buildings that need to be preserved. But for the most part, those buildings are already in great shape. Then we had the mine and the mill site on the other side of the road that had very complex issues. There was partial BLM ownership on the tailings pond area. There was a non-permitted portion of the site that was owned by LKA, and then there was a permitted portion of the site with DRMS that was owned by LKA. And with all these complexities and the whole issue that the contamination and where the tailings and waste rock had slucked down in Henson Creek, it didn't know the boundaries of the permitted or the non-permitted portion. So, in working with the active mining program at DRMS, we are close to, hopefully next week, for the county taking over the active mining permit from LKA, and then doing what's called as a technical revision, where the footprint gets reduced down to the building boundary, and that will enable EPA to come in and do a site-wide cleanup. the summer. Okay, I think I covered that. But if you guys have questions and we're moving along, feel free to raise your hand and we'll go from there. Okay. Okay, so we talked about beginning conversations. The CDPHE completed phase 1s and phase 2s for Hinsdale County, so the county was protected under all appropriate inquiry requirements. Basically, providing information to the county that says these are the contamination issues that we were able to identify. We conducted asbestos and lead-based paint assessments on all of the buildings there, and that's something that we'll be able to begin to tackle hopefully next year as part of the redevelopment that goes on and the stabilization. Okay, so this is what Stan was referring to when the T-Mountain had an avalanche that came down. Basically up there is a big cornice and head wall that slid and broke down, meandering its way down here, and this is Henson Creek right here. And it blocked up Henson Creek, and the level of the water got to be approximately 30 plus feet deep that backed up against where the tailings were. And so one of the main concerns is, well, these tailings are already pretty saturated. They're in a bathtub type basin that water infiltrates into them, so obviously they're going to be wet in there. But with the additional load of water backing up against those tailings, our concern was what happened in 1973 when the dam broke and killed fish and macroinvertebrates all the way down past through Lake City. I'm not sure how far down that ended up going, but I would say way past Lake City.
14 miles.
14 miles, fish killed it down. We didn't want that to happen again. That would take a tremendous toll on the recreation opportunities here in Lake City. So CDPHE contracted with DRMS to conduct a stability analysis on all the tailings and the waste rock on site. And that stability analysis said that, yes, they have factors of instability that we should address. And that fact alone was what enabled EPA to be able to come in and say, we're going to stabilize the site so we don't have a failure of these tailings and waste rock into Henson Creek.
This actual photograph, Mark, and I got to say this, you can call this good timing or bad timing. Mr. Rudolph came the day after this happened and looked at this site. And so we kind of teased him sometimes, this was our selling point, so to speak. But, this had actually occurred before in this avalanche zone, probably not quite as big as that. And County Road and Bridge Superintendent Robert Herb, we went and looked at it, and we were about ready to hit the panic button because we weren't so sure how high this thing was going to get. And to supersaturate a huge pile of dirt like that and make it into liquid mud and angle of repose and go into that river, we were seriously weighing options on how we were going to deal with that avalanche. Without putting people in harm's way, how high do you get it? What do you do with that water? How much water is behind it? And I talked to some hydrologists out of doing some quick calculations and engineer guys. We were trying to figure out how much water is that thing. We were trying to breach that somehow to unload that water system. And then what do you do when you unload that much water and Lake City's below you? And so as county officials, our eyes were pretty big. And we were not so exactly sure. And then Mother Nature did what it should have done. It started finally leaking a hole, and it gently reduced the thing. That actual avalanche stayed until October. And it stayed there forever. And it was, and so we don't, there's nothing you can do. T-Mountain Gulch is ran, but this is we're trying to prevent, and back to that 1973 dam break. And I was a kid when that happened, and I remember the people and the stores and the businesses. It killed fish for miles. And beyond that, the residue and the debris and the things that happened. And so this was a deal that we were trying to figure out a solution to, but thankfully Mother Nature did its own thing. It created it, and then it took care of that problem. But I'm not sure who we were going to call. But somebody. And we had a lot of exotic ideas that probably weren't so legal, like using explosives and stuff like that. But you know, it was a huge turnaround in this whole thing, because it did make everybody, you can plan for the what ifs, but that is the what if. And so we're trying to alleviate that some further.
Now, one of the things that I'm not sure if you can necessarily see is this is a picture looking up T Mountain. And so this picture right here is up and around that. So this avalanche probably blocked off well over, I'd say more than 100 yards of Henson Creek around this bend that you'll get to see. Yeah. The water in this vicinity right here is probably about 35 feet deep at that point in time. At about 3 weeks after this avalanche happened, and after the water bored a hole through the avalanche slide, EPA came up with BLM, DRMS was up there, and everybody kind of really got a view of the magnitude of what potentially could have happened. There was, I would say, probably a 15-foot hole drilled through the ice that Henson Creek bore through there. Okay, next slide.
There's still ice there now from the...
Exactly, underneath the debris. Yeah, it's probably covered with snow right now, maybe not. But we might be able to see it, some of the remnants from it. And that was 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago that happened?
Yeah.
2 years.
This was a unique deal that part of their display, you can see them building it, it's out here that's displayed. This was the Hard Rock revision, and this was funded by the Colorado Art Ranch in the summer of 2011. And it was a residency in art symposium, and Grant Pound, who's the executive director, which did a wonderful job, and they brought 7 artists and 7 scientists here. And you know, Dirk, Christy Borcher's head, she said, I think we got this idea. And I looked at her like she was crazy. But because you kind of got to wonder what an artist is going to do with the mine site. I understand the scientific part of it, but I was kind of a little perplexed, and even our county board and stuff, we said, well, exactly. And so here are the list of the people that... and where they came from. You know, we had an Irish sculptor, we had folks from all over the world. There was from Wyoming, we had from England, Canada, and they stayed here for, was it a month? They stayed here for a month. And they intermingled with the people at the community, and they asked lots of questions, and they went around and interviewed people and asked them what they thought their ideas were, and they spent lots of time. And they actually, out of our collection of junk that we acquired at the county, they took a door off of a refrigerator up there and made this thing that I believe is in Dirk's office, and it's a kind of a message board thing. But here are some of the ideas that they had, and probably the coolest one is the big pike is sitting on that pile. And and they had all kinds of things, you know, like some of the roofing paper, you can see pictures of to re-roof the buildings and things. There were, you know, slides and guy wire things. There was things that came out of, you know, things in the porthole. There's a water tower thing, which is an original piece of the mine. It's a redwood water tower to make it into stuff. But nothing was off limits to them. That's what we said to them when they came. We said, okay, you guys are very creative thinkers, and so create whatever you want. And they gave a very nice presentation. So a huge thanks to Grant Pound and that group. And they, you know, they video documentary of part of this thing, what it looked like and where we're at. And so it'll be interesting to see how all this works together. But these were just some of the ideas of picnic areas and all kinds of things. These are some of the things that, you know, we had the High Country News article, Banks Stabilization Assessment by Dreams in fall of 2000. Becky Sobel, who's, excuse me, is pictured there. She's a landscape architect from Manchester, University in England. She got a grant to come back here from her school from Europe and wrote papers, and she still has a blog today. We were in Colorado Matters. It was Silver Mine Promised a New Life in January, and then some other things, the voluntary cleanup plan and the Phase 2 town site. The town site was conveyed, like Mark said, in September 2012, and this is pictures of that and the old head frame and some construction guys that were there. The permanent closure of some abandoned portholes and adits that was done by Dreams Terra Taffy did a wonderful job, and it's kind of one of those deals you wait and you wait and you wait to get something done. And Terra's crew and the other crew that was doing the voluntary cleanup piece for us, they came the same day. And we're working on a postage stamp sized piece of dirt. But between Mark and Tara, they have a very good organized effort of finger pointing, and they have accomplished their task, and everybody was happy. Is that what you said, Tara? Something like that. Back to that note of that deal, that was probably the most significant piece of this whole thing. Is Hinsdale County we're very small and our budget is tiny. And I go back to that 3,200 tax receipts. As a Board of County Commissioners, we could not saddle or take on any cost to our taxpayers. And you have this huge associated risks that come with all these problems, but we could not saddle our constituents with these bills. And the county to date has had very minimal, we have some attorney fees and a surveying fee, but we have very minimal amounts of, we haven't put any direct dollars out for this stuff. We've acquired, significant funds through grants and other various sources to fund this thing without hitching the taxpayers to it. Mark is absolutely correct. Our Board of County Commissioners, Cindy Dozier and Susan Thompson and Michael McLaughlin, our attorney, in this action memo that was signed, we did take title in good faith, but we had to protect the citizens of this community to an associated risk on what the benefit was of the historical preservation, the economic benefit to come, and moving forward. And believe me, there was lots and lots. I can't tell you how many hours of phone calls and back and forth we had making this thing happen. And it was I guess I could say it was a calculated risk. And there was no guarantee that this action memo was really going to get signed. So we felt comfortable when we took title to that property. There was a certain process that you had to go through. And the EPA has been very helpful in that process. Now, they haven't been just, here's carte blanche. I mean, if you dealt with the EPA, they're nice guys, but their uncles are nice guys. They're something like that. What I'm getting at is it's a calculated deal that we finally got to, and Mark and he found that out. We do have that piece of paper, so the funding's there, and it's moving forward, and so it's taken care of. But that was a huge moment for us to do this, and it didn't come lightly. I know the county commissioners, Cindy, and we all have discussed repeatedly, what if, and you scenario planned to death, and some sleepless nights, and finally it came. So, and this was our next pieces that we're going to do, and we're going to collect stories. Interestingly enough, the mine itself, the Ute itself, and there's some folks even from here from Silverton who are associated, looked at that mine or are familiar with it. Steve Byrne had looked at it for mining plans, and there are even though it ran until the 60s underground, pieces of it, there's very few of those guys who are still here. And so we are going to make an attempt to get those guys and write down their stories and what they remember, and even in the mill, because you can fundamentally see how they built the pyramids and nobody really knows how they did it, because they're gone. I mean, you take it for granted they're here, but they're gone. It won't be long when they are gone, and nobody knows what it looks like under there, and those folks are gone. The people who ran the mill and ran the Buckeye and all that stuff, that history will be gone before we know it. So we're going to try to capitalize on that. We have some GOCO planning money that we're trying to work for a new park development in the fall of 2003. And then we're going to try to redevelop it for some kind of commercial use as a boarding house, ice climbing thing, you know, some kind of tourism piece, and things like that. And so we want to thank you and for your attendance, and we really want to thank you for coming to the San Juan Mining Conference and all the folks who put it on. It was very great, and I think there was lots of things that were discussed and learned. And so today, when we leave here, we'll go up there. The parking's kind of limited, so we have some vans we're going to take, 2 county vans, and encourage as many people that can go on that. We will go on and we will stop and look at this stuff, do some question and answers there on site, and then I believe Tara will go on up the road. It's half a mile up the road and look at the project that they had done, and which is, you know, it's unbelievable and outstanding work that has been done there, and go from there. So we thank you very much for coming to Lake City and Hinsdale County, and come back. So thank you very much.